Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Very glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. As you probably know, Jim Garrity is away, and here in his place today is Scot Bertram, General Manager, WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, 101.7 FM on the campus of Hillsdale College. His trophy case makes Nick Saban's, John Wooden's, they look paltry compared to the awards that those students have brought in under Scott's tutelage. He also directs the Hillsdale College Podcast Network in the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. Scott, great to have you with us again.
Greg, thanks for the kind words about my trophy case.
Of course. They're all true. Let's dive right in here. We have good. We have, I think, actually a second. The last two, I think, are pretty good. We're going to be talking about what seems to be the end of the road for Howard Stern. We're also going to be taking a look at the impact of students not having cell phones in the classroom, but we're going to start with a multifaceted look at the ongoing fight over redistricting in the state of Texas. We talked about this on Monday and how the Democrats fled to the most ironic state possible in Illinois. In fact, J.B. Pritzker was on with Colbert last night, and of course, as we know from Stephen Colbert, that was a very even-handed, fair interview with plenty of tough questions. Now, of course, it was just a tongue bath all the way through. But we're not even talking about J.B. Pritzker. We're talking about a couple of different elements here. First of all, Don Lemon. We just talked about Jim Acosta being a CNN cast-off. Well, so is Don Lemon, of course. But just like Acosta, Don Lemon has a podcast, and he is, of course, helping the Texas Democrats get their message out in any way that they can. And yesterday, he had on State Representative Jolanda Jones. And of course, she's hunkering down in Illinois with pretty much all the other Democrats. But it's her comparison here, what she likens this fight to, that really has our eyebrows raised.
And we better have the courage to stand up. Otherwise, we will fall for anything. And in this country, we will be defeated, deported. I mean, we will lose all of our rights. And if you think it can't happen, it can. And I will liken this to the Holocaust. People are like, well, how did the Holocaust happen? How was somebody in a position to kill all them people? Well, good people remain silent. Or good people didn't realize that what happens to them can very soon happen to me or somebody I love. And so even if you made it, man, you have an obligation to help people who can't, because God forbid they end up targeting you and your family.
It's not, I know people listening can't see this. Don Lemon is not paying attention. Because if you are paying attention and someone says the word Holocaust, you react in some way. Don Lemon's like looking down, typing an email, making a grocery list. Yeah, Holocaust. So there's no follow-up. There's nothing. It's just Don Lemon not paying attention as the guest goes off.
That was absolutely hysterical. Because yes, of course, redrawing congressional districts based on the fact that you've got 500,000 more people than the last time you drew the lines. And you can like the timing of this or the strategy for this, or you can not like it. Comparing the redrawing of congressional districts to the slaughter of millions upon millions of people, I'm not sure that's the parallel that you're looking for here. But in a slightly less egregious way, the Democratic Party water carriers in the media still doing their job. Here is Jake Tapper over at CNN saying, oh, sure, the Democrats do this sometimes, but it's really the Republicans who are abusing this process.
If you look at the map, right, you have some exceptions like Illinois. There's blatant Democratic gerrymandering. But most of the worst offenders when it comes to gerrymandering are Republican states.
No. And then he goes on to say, just like Texas. Now, I mean, Kathy Hochul's playing the victim here. She tried to gerrymander her state. Gavin Newsom's done this before. Plenty of other Democrat states do it. We talked about Maryland and their map, and the more states do this, the more other states are going to follow their lead. And so, I wouldn't mind if it was once a decade, but Republicans are just kind of catching up to the aggressiveness that Democrats have done here in redrawing the line. So what do you make of these two examples? I mean, Jolanda Jones makes Jake Tapper look almost reasonable, even though he's gaslighting the country. But what do you make of these two trying to carry the water for the Democrats?
Yeah, every time we run into a crisis like this, the rhetoric is amped up to a place to where words don't matter anymore. Georgia's voting laws, Jim Crow 2.0. And we know that the results of that are more people voting and MLB getting its All-Star game back despite no changes being made. All-Star game was pulled because of these racist voting laws. No one changed anything, and MLB came back, played the game. Words cease to have meaning. This is not like the Holocaust unless you mean it in the fact that people are rushing to get on trains to go to Texas because it's such a great environment for people to live and there's more people there. Stretching that analogy to outrageous proportions, of course. And people start tuning you out. I just saw someone complain yesterday on X that, it used to be if you called someone a Nazi, they'd say, no, I'm not. And they try to make sure that you knew they weren't a Nazi. And it's like, well, yeah, but if you call 125 million people Nazis, it stops having any meaning whatsoever. And you don't respond to allegations like that because it doesn't mean anything. Tapper, in that particular place, I guess credit for at least seeding that Illinois is heavily gerrymandered, perhaps. But it's statements like that. There's no ambiguity to what he said. Well, of course, Republicans are worse. Of course they are in various states. That, again, make people so unenthusiastic about viewing. You mentioned we weren't going to talk Jimmy Pritzker, and you lied because he was on Colbert last night, and I have to quote him. The great heroes of the Texas House Democratic Caucus decided the only thing they could do in order to stop it was leave Texas. And where did they decide to come to? The safe haven of the state of Illinois, where we are going to protect them and take care of them. I'm very proud of them. These aren't infants, for goodness sake. They're Democratic lawmakers. We're going to protect them and take care of them. By the way, the opposite is true if you're looking for an abortion, because J.B. Pritzker guarantees that we will not protect the child or take care of the child. Illinois, the abortion haven of the Midwest. That's what the laws currently allow in Illinois. But for these Democratic lawmakers, we'll protect them. We'll take care of them. Little blanket, pillow if they want, a mint before they go to bed, a little hot milk. We're going to take care of them. I'm very proud of them. J.B. Pritzker, running for president. Please remember me.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, it also reminds me of their attitude towards illegals until the numbers run into the billions. But in terms of the hyperbolic rhetoric, for so many issues, it's, well, if this Republican bill passes, everybody's going to die. From net neutrality, which was an FCC decision, to the original Trump tax cuts, the ones that were just renewed in this latest bill, but back in 2017, people are going to die from that, and so many other things. Of course, even in this big, beautiful bill, making people who are able-bodied but on Medicaid look for work or find work in order to keep getting those benefits, well, people are going to die from that too. They don't really specify that. But in terms of, since I mentioned illegals, I just want to say here, one of the big things the Texas Republicans are doing here is they're taking somewhat of a gamble that these areas along the border in these new districts that had been blue forever, but have recently turned red because of Biden's dereliction at the border and some other reasons, cultural conservatism as well. They have since turned to Trump, but that doesn't mean that they'll always stay there. But I think the reason that Republicans believe they'll stay there for at least the immediate future is the huge improvement we've seen on the border. We saw that instantly as soon as Trump took office, and we just got the numbers for July, and they're better than even the really good months we've seen so far. The lowest Border Patrol apprehensions nationwide, 6,177, shattering June's all-time low. Lowest Southwest border apprehensions, 4,598, nearly 500 less than the daily average under the last administration, which averaged 5,100 apprehensions per day from February 2021 to December 2024. And the peaks, which was late 2023, is even worse than that. And the lowest single-day apprehensions in history, one day, 88 at the southwestern border, July 20th. So, Scott, if you live along the border and you live through that onslaught, you know what a complete mess this has been for the last few years, and I would say intentionally so from the Biden administration. And so for them to see this massive improvement, I think the Republican gamble is probably going to pay off, assuming they get this map done, at least for the next few cycles.
When you can deliver good results, you reap good rewards, and that's what Republicans in Texas are counting on. Nothing's permanent in politics. To your point before that was, Democrats can go out and win these votes again, right? If they are so inclined to do so. The problem is their policies aren't designed to win them back. And that's certainly one of the things they're very concerned about. One other clip I saw yesterday, I didn't send to you. There was an ABC reporter. It was on ABC News Live, so it wasn't one of their top people and won't be based on this conversation because he was interviewing one of the state reps from Texas. The guy, I forget his name, but the guy who's being talked about as being perhaps a Senate candidate. He's the one who's going to beat Ted Cruz. But making the point that Democrats, by leaving, are also preventing this flood relief from passing in Texas, helping people affected by the recent floods. And the state rep was saying, yeah, but Republicans made a choice to prioritize redistricting over the flood relief. And the anchor said, yeah, but didn't you guys also make a choice that flood relief wasn't important enough that you wanted to stay around to make that happen for your constituents? And of course, the response was, yes, but Republicans made it was like Spinal Tap. Yes, but this one goes to, this goes to 11. It goes to 11. They made a choice. They prioritized redistricting. So that ABC News guy, I don't know his name, and apparently he won't be rising through the ranks there because you don't get away with that
No.
on ABC.
No, not on the most politically charged issue of the week. There will be massive repercussions on something like that. So, well, if you're Democrats having to tough it out flying on private jets and private buses, and I'm sure J.B. Pritzker's putting you up in the Hyatt or someplace nice, you're probably not stressing out too much. But if you are looking in the mirror in the morning and your skin's looking a little bit older and the lines are becoming a little bit sharper, Caldera Lab. That's why they're here, and it's especially for men. Simple, effective, backed by science, and it gets results. In a consumer study, 100% of men said their skin looked smoother and healthier. Nearly 97% noticed improved hydration and texture, and almost 94% reported a more youthful appearance. And it's not just talk. Caldera Lab spends years developing and testing each formula with leading cosmetic chemists to make sure it actually works. And they make a lot of different products. I particularly like the cleanser. Leaves my skin feeling fresh and clean, and it doesn't have any weird scents, which I always appreciate. And so upgrade your skincare with Caldera Lab. It's easy, it's effective, and it's made for men. Skip the drugstore and try it for yourself. Visit calderalab.com/3ml and use the code 3ml for 20% off your first order. Again, that's calderalab.com/3ml with the code 3ml for 20% off. All right, Scott, we've got some good news for parents and some good news for teachers and some good news for teens here as well. And so hats off to the researchers who conducted this study, which stretched everywhere from Wharton over to Copenhagen and dealing with this issue of students and cell phones and what the impact is specifically when they don't have their phones with them during class time. And so this was flagged by John Holbein, who's a professor of public policy at the University of Virginia. And here's kind of his summary of this. The new study drops that shows compelling evidence that cell phone bans cause student grades to modestly increase. And grade increases are largest among the lowest performing students, or at least previously lowest performing students. Some other interesting findings from the cell phone ban study show that students exposed to the cell phone ban were substantially more supportive of phone use restrictions. The ban increased students' perceptions of greater benefits from these bans and reduced students' preferences for unrestricted access. Now, despite a mild reported fear of missing out, there were no significant changes in overall student well-being, academic motivation, digital usage, or experiences of online harassments. There were some potential drawbacks, but one of them is the impact of having those phones with you up until recently. Spot checks of the classroom in the study revealed that students in the banned classes appear more distracted, possibly due to withdrawal from habitual phone checking. So basically their attention span is shot because of the time that they've spent addicted to their phones. Ultimately, the authors of the study conclude, quote, our results suggest that in-class phone bans represent a low-cost, effective policy to modestly improve academic outcomes, especially for vulnerable student groups, while enhancing student receptivity to digital policy interventions. All that's fancy language to say, Scott, that they're doing better in school because they're not distracted by their phones. And they're also probably talking to other people who they go to school with, which would be an amazing improvement in social interaction among young people.
I can't fathom anyone's particularly surprised by the findings in the study. There are roadblocks to any bans, and part of it is the students are so accustomed to having phones everywhere and anywhere, and asking them, mandating that they do not, is a hurdle to overcome. I think that plays out with some of the results in terms of the students didn't say they were distracted, but the observers said they were distracted. So the observers come in and say they're kind of fidgety, they're kind of, right? And that's all tied into the way they live their lives essentially every other day and everywhere, bringing the phones into the classroom. Democrats even are siding with those who say, let's get phones out of the classrooms. Democratic governors are saying, let's do it. Interesting mix here in Michigan where Gretchen Whitmer called for legislation to ban phones statewide, and then Democrats in the House all voted against a proposal to do just that. And there was even a stray Republican or two opposed. I talked to one of them actually who said, look, it's probably a great idea. I don't think that's the purview of state government to say that, no, you shouldn't have phones in the classrooms across the state. He thought local school boards should be the ones making those determinations. So there are different kind of hurdles to making this happen. But, I mean, can it surprise anyone that grades increased, especially among those who are struggling in class? The people who are having the most trouble in class, you take away a key distraction, you make them focus and become, as you mentioned, a more integrated part of the classroom, and all of a sudden the grades increase? No kidding. No kidding. Claire Morrell wrote a book a couple months ago called The Tech Exit, which talks a lot about strategies to make this sort of thing happen among our youth, to take them away from being tethered to the cell phone 24/7. And I personally, I can't speak from any kind of experience because I have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, and they don't have phones, and they barely use phones, except unless they're literally talking to someone, grandma and grandpa or someone like that. They don't have phones. They don't carry them with them all the time. Our school doesn't allow phones in the classroom. So I don't have firsthand experience with the kind of distraction or kind of detriment to learning and education that phones provide or allow these students. But this is not the first study to have these sort of conclusions, and it will only make the case stronger to begin moving in that direction.
Yeah, and my kids are pretty much the same age as yours. They do have, quote unquote, a phone. It has no internet access.
It's a dumb phone.
It's a very dumb phone. They have a few people that we approve that they can call, which is basically us and their grandparents and a couple of friends. And it's very limited who they can text, which is basically us. And so, if we drop them off at the pool in the summer and they're ready to come home, well, they'll do that. But in terms of keeping them off of social media, there's no social media, there's no internet access like this. And of course, they hate it because all their friends have it. But in the long run, I think that's going to be very, very good. Here in Virginia, they're just starting to implement this. Glenn Youngkin, our wonderful governor, has spearheaded this. We have heard reports from teachers in our local area about the policy prior to this where the students could have the phones. You'd have kids just openly playing video games on their phone during class, sometimes with the volume on. Nothing the teachers could do about it because the parents would always, of course, stick up for their kids, and the kids just didn't put their phones down when they were asked to. So, we'll see how this gets implemented from district to district and how aggressive it gets and what the consequences are if you don't abide by it. But this is not a shock because this is just simply common sense.
I think we're probably moving maybe faster by the day toward a place where that happens. I mean, you wouldn't allow, now this is going way back, the Sony Watchmans, the mini TVs. Schools wouldn't allow students to have little mini TVs in their backpacks and use them occasionally or use them between classes. I've seen some schools make that, okay, in class, no, but between classes, sure. You would never consider doing something like that, and yet the phones have become such an integral part of life for adults. And I always sort of make that, adults are adults and kids are kids, and there's differences between needs and desires and functionality for those phones. You're in school to do a job. That's to learn. And the best way to do that is to not have that distraction readily available.
Exactly. And I'll say one more thing. I don't know that it's a high percentage of students that were doing it, but I've heard rumors about this too. No phones, a lot harder to cheat on tests and stuff. And so a lot of positive developments as a result of that. So hopefully more and more places adopt that. Hey, did you know that the liver is the second largest organ in your body? Yeah, it's responsible for more than 500 functions, but for some reason, liver health doesn't always get the attention it deserves. But now there is Dose for Your Liver, formulated to cleanse your liver of unwanted elements, aid digestion, and maintain your body's filter. The science-backed formula promotes liver function, aids digestion, eases bloating, and even boosts energy levels. Also, reduction in brain fog, better sleep, and 1 dose for your liver is equivalent to 17 shots of turmeric juice. It's gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, and vegan. Support your health with Dose Daily. Save 25% on your first month when you subscribe at dosedaily.co/3ml or enter the code 3ml at checkout. And please note the 25% discount applies only to subscription orders, not one-time purchases. But cancel anytime, no hassle. That's dosedaily.co/3ml to get 25% off your first monthly subscription with the code 3ML.
Have you been a victim of affinity fraud?
The Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski. Every day, Chris helps unpack the connection between politics and the economy and how it affects your wallet.
Although someone could look like you, talk like you, relate to you, don't be convinced you can trust them with money. Whether it's your church parish, a union, don't be a victim of a scam.
Whether it's happening in DC or down on Wall Street, it's affecting you financially. Be informed. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, Scott, on to our final martini, and I would say this is also a good one. Howard Stern, of course, has been a fixture in radio and other entertainment for a very long time. For those old enough, they remember him as kind of one of the lead shock jocks, especially in the 90s, but he was definitely a shock jock in the 80s and even back into the 70s. After going off of regular radio, he signed a monster deal with Sirius XM, been about 20 years now. Getting about $100 million a year, which is quite the deal. But they're not making a ton of money, and it looks like even though Sirius is going to offer him a deal, he's probably not going to take it. The U.S. Sun reports, quote, Stern's contract is up in the fall, and while Sirius is planning to make him an offer, they don't intend for him to take it. One insider said of the impending end to Stern's latest 5-year contract, Sirius and Stern are never going to meet on the money he is going to want. It's no longer worth the investment. The insider added that fans may expect Sirius to strike a deal for his library. Quote, but as far as him coming back to doing the show, there's no way they can keep paying his salary. Now, Stern is already north of 70 years old, so he's probably in the zone where he's looking to wind things down anyway. Scott, so many things potentially to talk about here. First of all, just how disgusting he could be as a shock jock. Also, how he went from edgy and subversive to one of the most groveling, obsequious toadies for the left after kind of having this libertarian streak for a long time. Now, he did this because the Me Too movement was on and he didn't want to be one of the casualties, and it worked because he kept getting his huge contracts. He kept, landing big interviews, which he's actually good at. I think interviewing is probably one of his strongest suits. But in terms of just how he changed from this supposedly fearless guy who would say anything at any time, regardless of who it might offend or make angry, to just licking the boots of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and just any left-wing movement that happened to be afoot at the time. It was quite a shift to save his own skin.
Howard Stern, man, if it's the end of the road, it's been a ride. As you mentioned, back to the 80s, when he was making his name in DC and New York, and then syndicated radio through the 90s, transition post Janet Jackson, the 2000s, over to satellite radio, and then almost 20. I can't believe it's been almost 20 years. It's been a long time since he's been a central part of the cultural conversation, other than landing a Biden interview. He's not making news for his content anymore, like his non-interview content very much anymore, but getting handsomely paid for it. In addition to the salary, there's a whole lot of Sirius XM stock that he was given as part of that deal. So no one should weep for Howard Stern losing out his meal ticket if, in fact, this takes place. One thing I'll say, Private Parts, the movie, is raunchy, but it is really great and an excellent look inside the radio industry of that time. I have to carefully edit to show my students portions of that film when we're in class, because it does describe sort of the grind and some of the experience of working inside radio, especially during that time, the late 80s, mid-late 80s, early 90s. You said he's a great interviewer. I know people think he's a great interviewer. I hear that often. I don't know if he's a great interviewer, but he is great at making his guests feel comfortable. comfortable.
He gets them to talk, yeah.
Which means they do say things they don't say elsewhere. But I actually find his questions to be a bit Larry King-esque, meaning Larry King was very famous for not doing any prep before interviews. He said, I want my questions to be the same ones my audience would ask. My audience doesn't know anything, so I want to be just like them. I want to ask obvious questions. And Stern, a lot of times when I listen to these long-form interviews he does, there's a little bit of, not misinformation, it hasn't been misinformed, but he's just uninformed on some basic things about the guest or their work. And I don't know if that's sort of the way I would suggest doing interviews like that, but he does get people to say things they wouldn't normally say because they're very comfortable in that environment. And he's on Sirius XM, he's not on terrestrial radio anymore. So there's something there that does make guests sort of open up to him, but I'm not sure it's necessarily the questions he's asking. It's just more of a comfortable conversation that's happening. Yeah, man, he lived in a COVID bubble for at least 3 years
Long time.
or so,
Yeah.
where he was just hectoring anyone who would listen that you guys are crazy, you're all going to die. I got to stay in my basement. I can't touch anyone. I can't see anyone. He wore a tux to interview Joe Biden. So it's a very different Stern today than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. He's always been a very talented radio host from a technical perspective. I don't know how much that remains today because I don't listen to him very much on Sirius XM, like a good portion of the country, which is why some of his cultural cachet has fallen away. So if it is the end, Sirius XM says, we don't want you anymore, but we like your back catalog. We'd like to still be in the Howard Stern business, just not making new shows. He still could live for a while, in reruns, but new shows would be the ones that would not happen anymore.
Well, assuming he wasn't completely reckless with his $100 million a year, I'm guessing he's going to be okay.
And he made more hosting America's Got Talent, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, he's been very, very lucrative. His impact on the culture, I would say, is definitely a net negative. Less so over the last 20 years because, like you said, he just wasn't as much of a factor. But interesting change in the times compared to where we were a generation ago.
Do you know anyone who listens to Stern on a daily basis?
No.
I don't either, and I'm not doing a Pauline Kael like I know one I know listens to Howard Stern, but I know people who listen to things and are in the industry, and I don't know if it's really a centralized New York sort of thing because that was his home base for a long, long time in New York radio. If his audience is really centralized there or places where he formerly had radio affiliates, but I don't know anyone who listens to him on a daily basis. Everyone I know is a 3 Martini Lunch daily listener. Those are the people that I know in my circle.
Yeah.
I might be fibbing a bit there.
Why wouldn't you? I mean, this is obviously the place to be. And so, yeah, I mean, he basically traded cultural influence and popularity for a ton of money, which,
And freedom, he would say, too. The freedom to say what he wants, and he can swear, and he can have the lesbian strippers on, and no one can say he can't do that on Sirius XM.
Yeah, exactly. No more fights with the FCC, I guess. So anyway, Scott, great to have you with us the past 3 days. We will talk to you again a couple of days next week, and we look forward to that. Thanks for your time.
Yeah. Lesbian strippers on Monday here on 3 Martini Lunch.
No parents with young children listening. That is not happening. Scot Bertram is the general manager of WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, on the campus of Hillsdale College, 101.7 FM. He's also the director of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network and is the host, among many other podcasts, of the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour. I'm Greg Corumbus of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. They really do help us. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow all of us on X. Scott is at Scot Bertram with 1 T in Scott. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corumbus. Have a great Wednesday and join us again Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.